Hey everybody, welcome to the Morning Devo with Bo. Hope you guys are doing good today. And it is June 13th on the morning devotion. And my name's Bo Willett, and I'm stoked to be able to go through Matthew 17 with you. Big day though, right? Israel takes out some of the Iranian nuclear kind of building sites. So pretty intense for sure. A lot going on in the world. You could always check out A Reason for Hope at 4 o'clock p.m. Our Pastor Scott, will be on air, and I'm sure he'll go over all of the news and what's going on and all that. But in the Morning Devo, I like to just go through the Bible, and hopefully it helps you understand the Bible a little better. But simply just get familiar with the Bible. I mean, that's a big thing. A lot of people that go to church just aren't really familiar with even the Bible itself. They just don't know it well at all. And so I've always just liked to go through it. So we're in Matthew 17. You could always check out the archives at my YouTube channel. Go to YouTube, go to the search bar, type in Bo Willett. It's right there in the top right, that French-Canadian name, or you can go to just bowillett.com. It's kind of my catch-all website, and you can go there, and there's a list there of all the books of the Bible that I have gone through, which is practically every one. So, yeah, pretty awesome. And anyway, let's get into it. Matthew 17. Let's all take a breath. Yeah. Okay, it says, 6 days later, Jesus took Peter and the two brothers, James and John, and led them up to a high mountain to be alone. As the men watched, Jesus appeared his appearance was transformed so that his face shone like the sun and his clothes became as white as light. Man, white as light, that's pretty bright. Sometimes when the light is so bright, it's hard to see. And it says, suddenly Moses and Elijah appeared and began talking with Jesus. So there's this conference that takes place on the mountain, and it's one of Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. Pretty interesting, pretty significant people as well. If you have never read the Old Testament, you wouldn't even know who these people were. Like if someone said to you, hey, start reading the New Testament. We just read the New Testament. You wouldn't know a lot of what they're even talking about because they've never read the Bible Jesus read, and the Bible Peter read, and the Bible John read, etc., right? Yeah, you got to read the entire Bible and understand what is going on, why our world is the way it is, why we don't see God, what is the problem, what is the remedy. All this is way back, right? From Genesis, just start in Genesis, and it's right there. And suddenly they have this conference. It's a special time, for sure. The Messiah is on the scene. And it says, Peter exclaimed, Lord, it's wonderful for us to be here. If you want, I'll make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Now, there's a reason why Peter's doing this. He has read the Bible. He's read passages that speak of the coming kingdom of God. And that this kingdom, they would celebrate a particular feast in Israel. It was called the Feast of Tabernacles. You might have heard of that before. They would erect booths and live in these booths as a memorial for them wandering and being provided for and all that. And it was quite a festive festival, if you will. And so Peter says, man, this is awesome. The kingdom has come. That's the idea. Moses, Elijah, Jesus, definitely kingdom has come. So it's time for us to celebrate. I kind of love this. Do I think of the kingdom coming as a celebration, as like the Feast of Tabernacles? Having a tent. Hey, kids, let's go outside and live in the tent. We're going to remember how God's provided for us. And what a fun activity. All the kids are like, yeah, let's go do it. We're going to go live in a tent. And, it's out in your backyard or something. And, but do I think of the kingdom of God as something like, happy? Or do I see it as a bummer? And so it says, but even as he spoke, a bright cloud overshadowed them. Interesting. Cloud, light. These are all very Old Testament ideas of the presence of God. This is my dearly loved son. Interesting. Very similar to Old Testament stuff. This is my dearly loved son. You can always read Psalm 2 if you're interested. It says, kiss the son, lest he be angry. Woo! Yeah, there's a son that's spoken of. And it says, who brings me great joy. Who brings the Father great joy? The Son. You mess with the Son, you mess with the Father. That's how it is on the planet too, right? You mess with the Son, man, you got the Father to deal with. Well, that's what's going on here. It says that the Father has great joy in the Son. The disciples were terrified and fell face down on the ground. Isn't that interesting? Their encounter with the deity, with the Father, is one of just hearing, but it's one of upon hearing, they are terrified. Man, that must be amazingly incredible. You know, when we hear about the voice of God in the Bible, you hear about thundering, lightning, this kind of thing, rumbling. And I don't know about you, but when the monsoons come to the desert, it's kind of scary in a way because some of the lightning and the thunders is pretty incredible. And, you know, if you're not paying attention and you're outside and there is a thunder crack, man, it can freak you out. It's so loud. And so you see this similarity here upon hearing. You know, I don't know if you've ever listened to Tchaikovsky before, but, you know, sometimes you'll listen to the Russian composer and you'll be like, whoa, man, that's some noise going on. And with all those cymbals going off. And, you know, it can be pretty loud and pretty wow, you know. And so Jesus came over and touched them. Get up, he said, don't be afraid. And when they looked up, Moses and Elijah were gone, and they saw only Jesus. I love that. Don't be afraid. And they went back to the mountain. I went back down the mountain, and Jesus commanded them, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. I'm sure the disciples were like, what are you talking about, dude? You know, remember, Peter's already said, hey, you're not going to die. You're not going to be crucified. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan, right? And so we see it says, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man is raised from the dead. This kind of idea that just threads throughout the Gospels is that there's a particular time when there's going to be the announcement, the worship, the public display, but not yet. Then the disciples asked him, why do the teachers of religious law insist that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes? So they're talking about, you know, particular passages in the Bible. Isn't that neat? We get a little insight that they're doing a little Bible study. Hey, I was reading, you know, here, and I noticed that the religious leaders constantly say that Elijah must return before the Messiah comes. And Jesus replied, Elijah is indeed coming first to get everything ready, but I tell you, Elijah has already come. But he wasn't recognized, and they chose to abuse him. And in the same way, they will also make the Son of Man suffer. Now, Jesus has already spoken about this with John the Baptist. And so it says, when the disciples realized that he was talking about John the Baptist, that, hey, guess what? It's already happened, but they missed it. They're not paying attention. And a lot of people right now aren't paying attention. A lot of people haven't read the Bible and know about the Magog-Gog invasion in the Bible. They don't know about the prophecies in Zechariah that speak of Israel being persecuted once again. They don't understand the book of Revelation, how it talks about the Antichrist going after Israel once again. And that Israel will go through another time of turmoil, such as they have never, ever seen before, called the time of Jacob's trouble. People haven't read the scriptures to know that the very north country, perhaps Russia and the Persian Empire, Iran, and the areas of northern Africa are going to be involved in an attack on Israel. And that there's going to be a giant army from the east. People don't know. They've never read. They're not aware. And they just don't realize. And that's a bummer. You know, that it's right there, meaning they could pick up a Bible and start reading and start studying. But instead, you know, a lot of us pick up other things. And we're going to get involved in listening to other people. And it'll make us nervous, and it'll make us, you know, stressed out. It'll bring people tons of anxiety and all that stuff. It ain't going to give them any peace listening to all these other sources. Israel fell into this trap years and years ago, where instead of listening to the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah and their contemporaries, Instead, they listened to the news networks of the day, and it just brought them confusion and bad decision making. It says, at the foot of the mountain, a large crowd was waiting for them. A man came and knelt before Jesus and said, Lord, have mercy on my son. Don't you love that? Just have mercy. I love that. That beautiful cry. Today, have mercy on me. Is your heart one where you say, have mercy on me today? Or are you too puffed up and too prideful to think that you need mercy? He has seizures and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they couldn't heal him. And Jesus said, you're faithless and corrupt people. How long must I put up with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. Jesus gets a little bent, doesn't he? I mean, you see some emotion here. This man is in absolute turmoil over the sickness, disease that his son has, and the mental issues that are going on. And the father brings him to the disciples, and the disciples don't seem to do anything. And they couldn't seem to, make any headway. And then Jesus says, you faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you? How long must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. And then Jesus rebuked the demon in the boy, and he left him. From that moment, the boy was well. And afterward, the disciples asked Jesus privately, why couldn't we cast out the demon? And he says, you don't have enough faith. Jesus told him, I tell you the truth, if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mountain, move from here and there, and it would move. Nothing would be impossible. Amazing. Jesus seems to indicate that this, trusting in God, leaning on God, has an amazing effect. That there is a power that God has that we're just not aware of, or we don't believe in, or we don't think he is able. That's why I like singing the songs like he is able more than able. That old song, old Calvary song. He is able more than able to do much more than I could ever dream. Right? And I like that because it just reminds me that he is able. Do I trust him to do a work? Obviously the disciples, were doubting and, trying to find a formula or trying to, do something. How did Jesus do this again? Let me think, and kind of, go through a gyration instead of just crying out maybe to God and just saying the obvious, God, deliver this boy. It's amazing how we sometimes have to, we try to figure out this kind of, prayer magic formula. We'll read a book on this is how to do it, and this is how to do it, and that how to do it. And Jesus just simply says, you don't have faith. What's the issue? Faith, trusting God, leaning on God, depending on God to do a work. Remember, the disciples were caught up in who is the greatest. They were caught up in their own self-righteousness and their own kind of place in the kingdom. And this is something that plagued the disciples. And in a sense, it blinded them from seeing the mission of Messiah. And Jesus has already got on the religious leaders about them not trusting God, not trusting his word, not leaning on his word. Hey, Israel, lean on the word of God. Trust in the word of God. This has been the message of Messiah, right? And the disciples we see weren't getting it much either. Instead, they were focused on other things, got caught up in maybe their formulas and the way you're supposed to do things. And this is how we do ministry, and this is how it's done, and that's how it's done. And, this is the, isn't there a right way to do this? And instead of trusting God. I love that. Nothing would be impossible. I love that idea. Nothing will be impossible. What do I need when I'm dying? A resurrection. And nothing is impossible. That's so beautiful. So much hope in that statement. After they gathered again to Galilee, Jesus told them the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies. Jesus keeps telling them this, by the way. And he will be killed, but on the third day he will be raised from the dead. And the disciples were filled with grief. Remember, again, Peter saying, hey, I don't think so, Jesus. And Jesus just goes back at it, says it again. I'm sure he would say it to us again too. Here we go again, Bo. I'm going to say this again to you. On their arrival in Capernaum, Jesus had some things to say about Capernaum. It says, the collectors of the temple tax came to Peter and asked him, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? You know that temple tax? You know that tax that you got to go to the temple and you got to pay the old temple tax, to help with the upkeep of the temple. Something that every Israelite was supposed to do. It was a great social way to help fund the upkeep of the temple. And Peter says, yes, he does. And then he went into the house. But before he had a chance to speak, Jesus asked him, what do you think, Peter? Do kings tax their own people or the people they have conquered? They tax the people that they have conquered, Peter replied. Well then, Jesus said, the citizens are free. However, we don't want to offend them, so go down to the lake and throw in a line. Okay, so Jesus is going to tell Peter to go do something. Before he does, though, he just makes the point. Dude, we're not a conquered people. Why do I have to pay the temple tax? Don't they know who I am? One greater than the temple is here. The Lord of the Sabbath is here. The one greater than the temple is the one greater than the temple need to pay the temple tax? Who are they at? Who are they talking to? It was ridiculous that they would ask Jesus about paying the temple tax. Why do they got to do this? They're a part of Israel. They contribute. They tithe. They do their offerings to the temple for all the upkeep. Why do they got to do this? And Jesus says, but so that we don't offend them. Isn't it amazing how Jesus says, okay, let's not offend them with everything. They've already been offended quite a bit. It's already said many times that they have been offended. The religious leaders are very offended at Jesus. They want to kill him. But don't you love how Jesus has discernment? There's times to offend, and then there's times that we don't want to offend. And we have to think through those situations. We don't just take out a list of laws and say, okay, that's what's going on, this is what we do. Okay, that's what's going on, this is what we do. No, we are to discern, spiritually discern what is happening. What is the right thing to do at the moment? And there was a time where Jesus went into the temple grounds and he flipped over all the tables. And he literally broke them. And he said, my Father's house will be a house of prayer. He offended a lot of people when he did that. Got a lot of people mad. I'm sure the disciples were like, ooh, this isn't going to bode well for us. Yet, in this situation, he says, hey, we are free. We don't need to pay the temple tax. But so that we don't offend them, let's do something. Go into the lake and go fishing. Open the mouth of the first fish you catch, and you will find a large silver coin. Take it and pay the tax for both of us. Go fishing. Pull out the first fish, and you're going to see that the fish swallowed some kind of, has some kind of silver coin in his mouth. Take it, and we'll go pay with the fish, with what the fish he provided. Very interesting. It's one that, you always want to kind of look into more. Sometimes fish are obviously people, it's kind of a symbol, right? I'll make you fishers of men, kind of thing. That kind of idea. And some people kind of link that together. And, but here Jesus obviously just tells Peter to go fishing. Peter was a fisherman. And he says, hey, you've pulled up a ton of fish before, but just pull up one and go grab it. It's not going to be too hard for you, Peter. It's not going to be a big deal. We don't want to offend him. Just go do it. Sometimes we just got to go do it. And sometimes we can't get so offended, right? We don't want to offend others. So we just kind of do something, I guess we call it sometimes, what is it? Go the extra mile. Go the distance. Don't want to offend someone, so hey, we'll do that. We'll go and throw in the line, and God will provide. He'll give us what's needed for the situation. It might be in an awkward way. It might be super weird at the time, but God will provide and make a way. And I'm sure that's how it is with us too in a lot of relationships. There's a lot of things we need to discern. Do we really offend at this time? Do we really, just lay it out? Or do we not offend at the time? And we kind of go an extra mile. We kind of, have to do something to take care of that situation so that we don't offend. And it does take time, and it does take some of our effort and some of our even resources. The line, right? The line is the resource that Peter has to use. He had to pay for that line. Sometimes we have to invest in things, right? So that we don't offend. And some people just want to, they're just going to offend no matter what. They don't want to bend over backwards. They don't want to go do the extra mile. They don't want to go, oh, it's so exhausting. Oh, no, they deserve, they should be told the truth right now and da-da-da-da-da. And they should, Jesus could have sat with them and just argued about the temple tax, right? He could have just kicked back with them and just said, hey, let's talk about the temple tax. And let's talk about me. Let's talk about, should you really be charging people a temple tax? And is that really justified? Why are you really doing it? What is the motivation behind that? He could have got into a lot of conversations with him, but he doesn't. And instead, he says to Peter, hey, Peter, let's not offend him. Go and, will you follow me, man? Go do what I say. Will you follow me? So that we do something and not to offend these people. And Peter might have said, man, let's offend him. We're the greatest in the kingdom. Let's go offend him. I'm Peter, man. I'm the rock. Let's tell him the truth, Lord. And Jesus says, no, let's not offend him, right? Hey, go take your line, take your fishing pole, and go throw it into the lake. And I'll provide. I'll be there for you. Sometimes when we go that extra mile, when we do invest in even others that maybe don't deserve it, God will provide. God will make a way. There's going to be other times to have that talk. There's going to be other times to have that discussion. You might not have to hammer every conversation out right now. You might not need to deal with everything right now. And it's neat that Jesus uses this discernment. Do you use discernment? Are you a discerning person? Are you thinking through things? Or are you reactionary? Peter being such a reactionary guy, I can really see why Jesus says, we're not going to offend him, Peter. Go and fish, and I'll provide. Because when you're impulsive and you just you're flying off the seat of your pants, right? Is that the term? I don't know. But you're just, you're moving. You're making a lot of decisions super fast with a lot of emotion. And sometimes that's a recipe for massive disaster. A lot of emotion, a lot of impulsive actions, and you're just not discerning. Even in my marriage, can I live in a way not to offend? Do I feel like I need to offend my spouse? Do I have to, help her see the truth? I'm going to do it. Or do I believe God can provide through me, my investment, my patience, my perseverance, these type of things? Man, very cool. Good devotion, good things to think about. Put it into your own life, right? Put it into your own life. Discernment. How has that affected you? Is it affecting you? How are you discerning? In what ways are you discerning? Do you find yourself impulsive? Do you find yourself quick to judge? Do you find yourself quick to try to fix? Wanting to see righteousness happen so fast. So you're ready, God pounce on him, God pounce on him, get him, and I'll help you. We're going to see Peter is going to have an issue with that as we continue on in the book. Okay, so that's Friday's devotion, Matthew 17 in the books. And you guys take care, right? Have a great day. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.